Is that working?
Yeah, I think we're there.
Still kind of coming online for me over here.
No, I can see it on YouTube.
Very good. Is that working? It is working.
I think we're there.
Coming online for me over here. Okay, I just needed not
No,
feedback. Let me mute that. That's me from a minute ago. All right, so good evening, one and all. Welcome to the May 2021 Ballard District Council meeting, online again. Our 14th meeting online in a row, actually, but still successfully trying to bring it to you. So welcome. We want to start with our now customary land acknowledgement and just mention that the Ballard District Council respectfully acknowledges that all of the greater Ballard area is on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people. And we honor with gratitude these lands and waters which have been cared for by the Duwamish, Suquamish, and Muckleshoot people, past and present. As I said, we're into our 14th meeting already online. Hopefully we won't be doing this online only for too much longer, but we very much appreciate folks tuning in and catching it on computer, since we haven't quite gotten to the point with vaccination and COVID that we want to with getting together. I also want to mention that while we've been proudly bringing these meetings to you online every month, successfully for a little over a year, it does take a fair little bit of energy to coordinate, organize, and set up this endeavor. And we want to put another pitch out for anyone who's consuming this fantastic information we've been providing to the community, that we would love to have your help. We're looking for volunteer support in any and all means kind of necessary and possible. So if you have an interest in getting involved, it's a fun way to kind of get connected to some more of us in the Ballard, greater Ballard community, and contribute some effort that we could certainly use. We've been trying to really focus on a number of salient topics, really the critical topics in Ballard for the past year. We've had a handful, if not more, meetings focused on housing and the homeless population in the Ballard and greater Ballard area. We've talked a lot about the radical urbanization and the growth and development pressure, and had a number of developers and architects come and talk to us about a number of the projects that are happening, mostly with an orientation to Market Street over the past year. We've also just most recently, last month, focused in on the maritime and industrial community and kind of looked back at the history and the current challenges of our maritime and industrial business community. And one of the challenges that certainly came up in that meeting was the issue of transportation and industrial and business commercial transportation in and out of the Ballard area, which brings us to our agenda for this evening. So tonight we're really excited to have a panel of a pretty large host of folks who are going to really focus and zero in on that topic of transportation planning, municipal and regional transportation planning here in Ballard. Really pleased and grateful to have a few folks from the Seattle Department of Transportation and the Government and Community Relations Manager of Sound Transit. And then we'll be joined after a little information and presentation by folks there with some folks who represent organizations who have stakeholder interest in these issues of transportation planning and transportation infrastructure and transportation challenges here in Ballard. So as I mentioned, Lita Chahim is with us. She's the Government and Community Relations Manager for Sound Transit here in this part of the country, or this county. And then we're going to be joined by Diane Wyatter, Principal Planner and Chief Architect of the Ballard Interbay Regional Transit System Study or Report for SDOT. Matt Donahue will then follow her. He is the Roadway and Bridge Structures Division Director with SDOT. And then here to provide technical support and information in support of them is Wes Ducey, a Senior Transportation Engineer with SDOT. So without further ado and more introductions right now, I'm just going to turn it over to Lita for our first presentation, talk a little bit about ST3 and Sound Transit in Ballard.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Just as I pull up the presentation on the screen, Introducing myself again, Lita Shaheen, Government and Community Relations Manager at Sound Transit. And I do, as you mentioned, focus on particularly Seattle and West Seattle and Ballard. That project corridor is the one I've been working on the 4 years, almost 4 years I've been at Sound Transit. So I am going to provide a quick overview on the project, and I look forward to the discussion. So just for context here, the West Seattle and Ballard Link Extensions project is part of a broad system expansion effort that we are doing as an agency, a regional investment with Sound Transit 3 and the 2016 voter approved package that includes a 252-mile network across Puget Sound with miles and miles of light rail, commuter rail, and bus rapid transit. If you look on the map, you'll see that we have the West Seattle extension line here in our new naming convention, line 3 in pink, that'll eventually get you up to Everett. And our focus for tonight, the Ballard extension, which is line 1, will include a new downtown tunnel and eventually connect you to the SeaTac Airport and further south. Also exciting, I'll just note that we are opening the Northgate station, which will include stations at Roosevelt and U District October 2nd. So that's exciting. All right, diving into the West Seattle and Ballard Link extensions and the latest on the project. One note I will just make, everything I'm sharing tonight is on this website link that I'll put in the chat later, or I can share out with folks, but it's wsblink.participate.online. It's a great site to bookmark and has a lot of this stuff explained out. So if that's a helpful resource, please do bookmark that. So we are planning, the West Seattle and Ballard Link extensions is actually 2 extensions, and we are planning them together. This timeline represents that. So the planning phase for both is 2017 to 2023, and that is the phase that we're in right now in green. We then proceed on to design and from 2023 to 2027, and construction, so design's in gold there, and then construction from 2026 to 2036. With start of service for the West Seattle extension at 2031 and Ballard in 2036. And I will just note at the bottom, you see project scope and schedule subject to change. That little note is reflecting that we are seeing financial pressures on our system expansion program, both from decreased revenues and increasing costs. And so our board is going through a realignment process where they're looking at how to deliver on the voter approved projects, but how to adjust plans and timelines to address the financial pressures we're seeing. So then zooming into that planning phase more deeply, we have 2 parts to planning. We have the alternatives development phase from 2017 to 2019 that we have completed. And then we have environmental review from 2019 to 2023. Just a little note about what we did through alternatives development, and I appreciate that Mike Stewart is here on the panel and was part of our stakeholder advisory group for this process. But we essentially, the alternatives development process is all about looking at lots of different potential routes and station locations and trying to decide what to study in more detail in the environmental review phase. And we didn't do that alone. We did that through a lot of engagement out in the community, and then with a stakeholder advisory group and elected leadership group, sharing recommendations with our board that ultimately identified preferred alternatives and other alternatives to study in an environmental impact statement. So now we're in environmental review, and what we are doing is developing a document that will be published later this year. So we say mid-2021. But it's looking like, late summer, early fall for that timeline. And that document analyzes and looks at all the routes and station locations that were identified for study for potential impacts and so forth, and shares that out with the public for your comment. And that comment period, after that comment period, we will share those comments and the analysis, the draft EIS with our board, and they'll confirm or modify preferred alternatives. So it's just a draft. Then we move to the final. And as we prepare the final environmental impact statement, we'll be responding to all the comments we receive in the draft environmental impact statement comment period. And after that's published, the board will select the project to be built and we'll have a record of decision. So that's when we know the project. We then move into design and construction after that. So more specifically on the alternatives that we're looking at in this phase, I'll just speak at a high level and then we'll zoom in on the Interbay Ballard segment. So we're studying 3 different types of alternatives in this phase, and you'll see here on this map, this is both the Ballard extension and the West Seattle extension, and all the stations here are named. We're looking at preferred alternatives that are in pink, and preferred simply means that that is a direction, a sense of a direction on where the project is headed. It is not an obligation for the project. So I mentioned that environmental review process, the draft environmental impact statement, and that comment period. After that, our board will potentially modify or confirm the preferreds. So you see the pinks through here all along. We also have preferred alternatives that were identified that had added scope elements, such as the tunnel crossing across Ballard that would require additional funding based on what we knew at the time. And then we have other draft EIS alternatives as well, and those are all in blue. We study them all equally in the environmental impact statement. All right, now I am zooming in to the alternatives. So there are the 3 types of alternatives that you saw before, but now north is facing to the right. I will start with the pink preferred alternative here. So this alternative exits a downtown tunnel through a portal located on Republican near Elliott. It travels in an elevated guideway north along Elliott, veering west of Elliott to serve a Smith Cove station that is elevated above the Gaylor Street flyover. The alternative continues over the Magnolia Bridge, through the Armory property and between the Interbay Golf Course and the BNSF tracks, still in an elevated guideway, and then it goes over the Dravis Street Bridge and gets to an elevated station north of Dravis Street near 17th. That's the Interbay station. The alternative will then travel northwest up to 14th Avenue Northeast and cross Salmon Bay in a high-level fixed bridge. And it would continue up to 14th with an elevated station there at 14th. That's these boxes here. Okay, that's one. Then we'll go through the 2 preferred alternatives that are in brown. Those are the ones with third-party funding. So these are tunnel options under Salmon Bay. They both connect to the pink elevated alternatives just south of Dravis Street, but instead of going over Dravis, they would go under Dravis to have a retained cut station. North of Dravis Street near 17th, they would enter a tunnel portal west of 15th and south of the Emerson-Nickerson interchange, and then travel under Salmon Bay. One option gives you a station at 14th here and one at 15th. So we're looking at both of those options. Next, I will flag the 15th Avenue alternative. You can sort of imagine that it is underneath the pink alternative, the pink line from the portal and Republican here. And we see the station there at Smith Cove, east of the east side of Elliott, north of Prospect Street, where the Helix Bridge is. And then it would continue north along the blue line and it hugs the Queen Anne hillside. You see here, it goes elevated along 15th. You have a station here at Interbay near, and then actually now this one we'll go across here. And we have a station in this area and it crosses and meets, so it would rejoin the center of 15th to an elevated station near the Dravis Bridge. Entrances on either side of 15th, sorry, that is here. And it would continue north and curve slightly west of the Ballard Bridge. And you have this movable bridge, that's this option here. And then we also have an option that connects to that 14th bridge option along here. We have a slightly different option here too, based on the Seattle Center station that's located here, but I think that's enough for now. And if there's additional questions on these alternatives, we can absolutely answer them. For environmental review, I'll be brief on this because I know I just had 10 minutes, but what is an environmental impact statement? As I mentioned, it provides the agencies and the public an understanding of the environmental consequences and helps with that decision making. looks at the range of alternatives, potential impacts, and mitigation. We look at that, how the project affects the natural, built, and transportation environments, and we look at it both during construction and operations. And then in particular, here are all the ranges of topics that we look at in that environmental impact statement. So all of those alternatives, we look at all these topics in the environmental impact statement and share those out with you. And then for each of those topic areas, we look at that with an environmental justice focus as well. And we are partnering with the City of Seattle on a racial equity toolkit for this project. I will lastly mention our station planning efforts are ongoing. We are very interested in how our light rail stations interact with and support the uses around the station and how people can access those, particularly from various points and sort of key destinations that people have shared with us. We've done a lot of engagement early on this process. We've continued our agency coordination and look forward to more engagement as the draft EIS is published around stations, and next year with our city partners as well that are looking at the broader station area while we're looking at the station and the intersection between. We have lots of ways to engage, and I will just say that we're focused on preparing folks for the draft EIS publication with our online platform and briefings like this one. We'll also be engaging with potentially affected property owners in advance of the draft EIS publication, and are always looking at ways to reach diverse audiences. And then when we actually publish the draft EIS, we'll be looking at lots of different ways to engage folks to receive those comments. That'll be a really important time to engage with us. Okay, that's everything. Thank you. I will.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lita. Very much appreciate that. So the one quick little follow-up question I had, just looking at the stationary plan, is there's not any kind of conceptual on what it looks like in Ballard in any way yet. Just that generic sort of, here's a station on a 3D kind of rendering. So all that is still yet to be thought about.
Yes, so we do, and we'll have more visuals when we publish the draft EIS, and as part of our station planning effort and taking all the feedback we've been hearing through our community engagement efforts and our agency collaboration to have more visuals. We are, of course, in a planning phase, so those kind of 3D understanding how the station might operate, we're still a bit early for some of those.
That's what I thought. I just want to clarify that for folks.
Sure.
Yep. So that's a great context. Now we know what's hopefully coming in not too many more than 14 or 15 years from now, with hope. So remember then the pink lines and the gold lines you just saw, and think about that now in the context of a bunch of really hard planning work that our friends at Seattle Department of Transportation have been doing in the Ballard Interbay Regional Transit System Study. Diane Wyatter is here to talk about it.
Thanks, Brent, and thanks, Lita. I want to start out by saying I was the project manager on the Ballard Interbay Regional Transportation System project, which we call BERT. And I also am part of the SDOT planning team for the West Seattle Ballard Light Rail Extension projects in Ballard, Interbay, and Smith Cove. So I'm also familiar with working with Lita and Sound Transit and all of these proposals, and feel like I'm very familiar with your territory at this point. I'm also working on the Maritime Industrial Strategy, which is a mayor's office initiative. So I have a lot of familiarity with Ballard and the BINMIC. So with that, Matt Donahue is gonna run the slides for me, and I would say we can start with the next slide. Thank you. So when I looked at the participant list here, a lot of people have been to a lot of my presentations, I think, and so I'm going to go over the BERT study really high level fairly quickly, because there's nothing worse than being boring. So this I'm just going to talk about the background, the purpose, the bridge replacement timeline and funding, and then just give a little legislative update. This is the new news that maybe not everyone knows. And this is the map of our general study area. The yellow is the BINMIC, the Manufacturing Industrial Center. The purple is the Washington State Armory. And I'm sure you can see where the Ballard Bridge is and what a constrained environment it is for transportation, because there are not so many crossings across that water body. Okay, next. The city too always does a land acknowledgement. I appreciate that the Ballard Community Council did one. And so I won't read this whole thing, but I would say as we look to the future, we actively recognize that we live, learn, and work on Indigenous land. And that is certainly the case here. Okay, next. So in 2019, your state representatives got a budget proviso for the city of Seattle to create a report on how to improve travel for people and goods in Ballard and Interbay. And this is the BERT study. We were required to work in coordination with agency partners. We were required to include recommendations for maintaining the current and future capacities of both the Ballard and Magnolia bridges. And we had to send a report into the legislature by November 1st, 2020. And so that is basically the overview of what we accomplished. Okay, next. These are our agency partners. This is just to say that all of these folks have a vested interest in the area and a very vested interest in transportation, the transportation system working well. And so we had an interagency team who helped us form the report. In addition to that, although it was not required, we did do a bunch of public outreach and public meetings. When I started this work, I was able to go to the Magnolia Community Council and have a couple public meetings at the library in Ballard in person. And now that just seems like, you know, forever ago and kind of dreamy. So I look forward to the time when I can be with people again. Okay, next. So I would say the strength of the legislation was that it asked us to look at the system as a whole and to look at all modes. This is because it's in the Manufacturing Industrial Center. There's a freight route along 15th, along the bridge, and because it's such a constrained corridor, we had to look at how to keep everybody moving in the most efficient ways. So we came up with a number of recommendations in addition to the bridges, because bridges alone in a vacuum don't mean anything, right? It's how they connect to the system and how to keep the system functioning. And so we made a number of recommendations from, you know, corridor signal optimization to bicycle and pedestrian improvements at a number of intersections to connecting bike facilities and creating freight and transit lanes along 15th and Elliott. Matt's going to put a link to the report in the chat. The report is about 150 pages. The appendices, many, many hundreds of pages more. So if you want to delve into it, we would love for you to do so. Okay, next. In all of our analysis for transportation, we looked at 2 bridge options for each bridge. And these came from the work that Wes and Matt were involved in creating the Ballard and Magnolia Bridge planning studies. We used the low height and the mid height Ballard bridges. Both of these are bridges that open and close. And for the Magnolia Bridge, we used the 1-to-1 in-kind replacement and also the Armory Way Bridge alignment alternative, which that community often called the least worst alternative to the 1-to-1 replacement. The BERT report does not make a recommendation of a preferred alternative. And these 2 options for each bridge that we chose really were based on the best options from both a technical and public support standpoint. Okay, next. So this graphic is shows all of the steps required to constructing a bridge. And It shows the time required to do those steps, and then a final cost. So the Ballard Bridge construction timeline, we have completed the planning phase. Well, we've done a bunch of planning work. We haven't completed it, but there is the Ballard Bridge report. The next step is a type, size, and location study. And this element is required as the basis for advancing a project, the design and engineering stage, and the type, size, and location study, which is the 12 to 18 months, is required by, I believe, federal law. And Matt Donahue can correct me if I'm wrong. But it's the step that takes you to design. And of course, you've got to do environmental work. Once decisions are made about the location, type, and size, there's often right-of-way acquisition that needs to be made. And overall, this whole process, if we had funding today to start the type, size, and location study, it would take us 8 to 12 years to have the bridge constructed. So, and this tells you the price differential for the low-level bridge is about $471 million, and the mid-level bridge is about $971 million. Next. We did the same thing for the Magnolia Bridge for the one-to-one in-kind replacement. The total for that is about $400 million, and then also the Armory Way Bridge would be about $266 million. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Matt. Thank you. So the Washington State Legislature asked us to do this report. They didn't provide us any money to implement any of these projects. However, I wanted to say that that the report has created a certain amount of buzz. We have briefed council members, so basically city and state elected officials, and the word about the report and the bridges is more pronounced now. Large bridge projects like Magnolia and Ballard, cities can't afford to pay for them themselves. You know, we will require federal funding and state funding. And so the report is a good step to getting us there. I have to say that your state legislators should be commended for working really diligently this session. They initially had $54 million in the budget, both in the House and in the Senate, for $54 million to do the type, size, and location studies and some environmental work for the bridges. There were a number of iterations of budget bills and transportation bills, and the $54 million stuck for a while. But what didn't happen was there was not a new transportation revenue package that was passed, and that would be a necessary step to get to this kind of a price tag for the bridges. When legislative session started, there was conversation about possibly increasing the gas tax. There was conversation about, you know, some big projects, a bunch of electrification projects, bridge projects, and you know, broader political issues made it so that individual legislators could not have gotten beyond what happened this session. But these bridges have had a voice. They've come up and would be more likely to be funded, you know, in a future session when there was additional revenue. So with that, I'm going to take you from the politics of the state to Matt Donahue, who deals with bridges on the ground at the city of Seattle.
Thanks, Diane. Just bear with me a minute here. I had a couple of technical difficulties. I lost access to my microphone and camera when I started sharing my screen for some reason. So just bear with me.
They're coming through just fine for us. And
good, thank you.
fine. We're not uptight or formal. There you go. It's working.
All right. And hopefully those controls will go away. So good evening, everybody. My name is Matt Donahue. I'm the Roadway Structures Director, Division Director for Seattle DOT. Happy to be joining you here. I am also a resident of Ballard, so I'm not sure where everybody is at, but we're probably right down the street from each other. Let's see. There we go. So what I'd like to talk about with you today is just a brief overview of the Roadway Structures Division. We were joking earlier about whether or not I'm a division director or a manager. When I started the job, I was a manager, and the DOT saw fit to make Roadway Structures its own division. So we used to be coupled with the Capital Projects Division. And now we are in the same portfolio as Capital Projects and Project Development, but we are our own dedicated bridge and other roadway structures division. And that only goes back to October of 2019. And then I also like to give just a really brief history of the Ballard Bridge and then talk about what is going on with the Ballard Bridge today. So the Roadway Structures Division, we've got about $8.3 billion worth of inventory. So 124 bridges, 613 retaining walls, 502 stairways, and 238 areaways, which I usually say, because most people say, well, what's an areaway? And I say, oh, if you've ever done the underground tour in Pioneer Square, then you know what they are. But there's quite a few areaways here in Ballard. So I get to actually say that because you folks know what that means. So we are responsible for all these assets for maintenance and operation. The way that we're structured is there's basically four main groups inside of roadway structures. So we've got all of our movable bridge operators, our structural engineers and inspectors, our structural maintenance team. So we've got 7 union tradecraft groups in our division: mechanics, electricians, concrete finishers, carpenters, installation maintenance workers. And we've got our leadership team. So myself and the managers that work with those other teams to lead the whole division. And one of the reasons I decided, I was in consulting as an engineer and commercial diver for about 26 years. And one of the reasons I decided to come to SDOT is because most of my clients when I was in consulting had bridge operations, bridge inspection, and bridge maintenance completely separate. And it's a real advantage here, much to the chagrin of my other DOT counterparts throughout the region and the country, that we're in the same division. We get quite a bit of efficiency out of that. We're also responsible for several capital programs like bridge painting, bridge load rating, several capital programs that aren't related to the levee. And then there are 3 levee sub-programs that roll up to roadway structures. So the stairway sub-program, bridge seismic retrofit, which is a particular interest of mine. What brought me to the region about 16 years ago was going to grad school at Oregon State to study earthquake engineering, both geotechnical and structural. And then bridge rehab and replacement, which are really the longer term studies. And the Ballard Bridge replacement study was one of those in that sub-program. We also provide subject matter expertise for fixed structural assets throughout the city to other departments. We do quite a bit of emergency response. We do emergency response for ourselves if there's a movable bridge outage or if a bridge gets hit, which happens very often. We also come out to help the state deal with those same things when they ask us to. We do quite a bit of equity work inside of our own division. Our leadership team and the division as a whole has quite a bit of interest in equity work that revolves around anti-recidivism and workforce equity in general. And then we're only funded for the maintenance side of the house to about 0.8 FTEs. So we do other work to make up that 20% difference. We do other work for other divisions in the DOT, other departments throughout the city, and other agencies throughout the region. So, we take our work seriously. Roadway Structures is, I've been with Roadway Structures for 3 years. I've been with the DOT for 4. We are populated with, most of my colleagues in Roadway Structures have been here for 20 plus years. So you've got, maintenance and engineering professionals. Our engineering supervisor, Anela Mola, I think he's coming up on year 35. And so these are a pretty talented group of individuals that have dedicated their professional lives to the city and to the bridges and other structures throughout it. And I find it a great honor to lead that kind of a team and to be part of it. So some of the ways that we demonstrate that are examples of work that's going on right now is we've had 2 new bridges within the last couple of years. So we've had lander grade separation got completed recently. Sometime, our timeline for the BERT, how long would it take to build a bridge? The need for the lander grade separation was first mentioned in a railroad charter, franchise charter in 1910. So sometimes it can take a little bit longer. We've got quite a bit of seismic retrofit going on for the levee, as I mentioned. One of the more recent ones, which I think is actually pictured here, is the West House Street Bridge. So on the right there, you've got a construction worker putting up a new steel gusset reinforcement plate. We are, as most people know, but I finally a meeting where I'm not talking about just the West Seattle high-rise bridge, but of course that's been going on with repairs both to the high and low bridges. And then just in general, our engineering inspection is a function of maintenance, right? So the maintenance folks, the bridge operators for the movable bridges, and the maintenance teams are all focused on inspection, identifying things that need to be fixed in our maintenance program, and then fixing those things. And that's across all of our assets, but there's federal law around how we inspect and maintain our bridges. And so above water, it's a 24-month cycle for inspection. Below water is 5 years. And then if there's an issue with the bridge, we can reduce those frequencies to anywhere down to 6 months or monthly if we see fit, depending on the bridge and the issue. So onto the Ballard Bridge, quite a bit, I love working on movable bridges. It's one of my favorite parts of this job. It's also really difficult and complex because they are complicated structures and they're really old. But if it wasn't for problems and challenges, I wouldn't have a job. So I do like working on these things. And it's also really interesting, and so does the rest of the team. I know that the bridge operators, at least one of them is a commercially licensed vessel captain. And so bridge operators are responsible for maintaining, they're at the nexus of 2 things, the marine waterway and the transportation network for vehicles. And so they're responsible for safety of both. And they take a great deal of pride in the bridge that they tend to, they go all around the city to cover shifts, but they do tend to work at specific bridges most of the time. And they are very, very proud of the bridges that they operate. So in 1917, the bridge opened. Several different upgrades through the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. A major mod to the bridge control tower in 1967. I actually didn't realize this until I looked this information up for the presentation. I thought they'd had a timber pier protection fence out there for a lot longer than 1970. That's a little frightening to me. It became went onto the National Registry of Historic Places in '82. The first seismic retrofit was in '94, then a big mechanical electrical rehabilitation in '02. And the most recent major effort up there was this painting of the steel sections of the structure, the bascules and the steel approach section in 2012. So right now, many years before I came to Roadway Structures, the folks that ran the group at that time decided that as the bridges aged, they needed to increase their mechanical and electrical, their contingent of mechanics and electricians. And so our mechanics and electricians go out to every movable bridge, so the 4 that the city owns and the 5th South Park Bridge that we operate for the county, every month. And so there's regular, they have a checklist. They go through the checklist every single time. And so the electricians are looking at the electronic control systems that basically run from the control tower, from the control station through the PLC or programmable logic controller. It's kind of the brain or capacity protection in between the control panel and the actual motors and machines that run the bridge. They go through all the motors. We have backup generators, 2 backup generators on every movable bridge. And so those are, we actually bring in a contractor to come in and maintain those on a monthly basis. In 2019 and 2020, as we mentioned, there was the Ballard Bridge planning study. And then part of that bridge rehab and replacement sub-program was around $10 million for the studies that were in it. And then there were somewhere in the neighborhood of about $5 million that was dedicated to bike safety on bridges throughout the city. And that was something that was teed up as part of the original levy. And I think perhaps Councilmember O'Brien had a hand in that. And so the work that was done as part of that on the Ballard Bridge is pictured there on the right. And it's, if you've been through that part of the neighborhood or over by the bridge recently, you can see newer markings and curb ramp improvements that have gone in just the last couple of years. One of the classic ways that, so I've been going to conferences for heavy movable structures. That's actually the big conference every, I think, 2 to 3 years is the Heavy Movable Structures Conference. And at every conference, there's always someone from a jurisdiction that's come in and talked about how one of their main bearings failed and they didn't realize that was going to happen. So the main bearings are basically the big steel pins that each bridge bascule pivots on, right? So there's 4 of them, 2 for each bascule, one per side on each bascule. And so I think, in the asset record for this bridge, they had done UT inspection of these pins quite a while ago, but not recently. And so we carved out some funding last year to go through and test all the pins, all 4 pins on all 3 of the ship canal bridges. We didn't really feel the need to do it at South Park because it's a newer bridge. And the Spokane Street Swing Bridge is a hydraulic lift and turn bridge. So it doesn't have the same component. And I kind of, held my breath and bit my lip for a couple of months while we were waiting for the results to come back. But fortunately, they came back with no delaminations or deficiencies found. So that's really good news. In 21 and 22, because of some additional money that we got from council this year, we're going to go through a planning rubric and have a project manager in roadway structures work with our, we have a supervisor who covers both mechanical and electrical crews. And those 2 are going to work together to really, the mechanical electrical supervisor keeps a running living list from the preventive maintenance work, monthly preventative maintenance work of all the things he wants to upgrade, change, or data that he needs so that he can analyze how the bridges are functioning. And, but that list is basically just him putting his mind to it. Now we're actually going to spec out components and spec out processes to come in and analyze the data to give us more information. That's often not cheap. And so if I'm going to ask for more money for things, I need to be a little bit more specific in what we need and why. And so we're going to come up with that plan through 2021 and probably into early 2022. One thing I forgot to put in here is we are actually doing bridge balancing this year. Also because of some of that extra money from council, we were able to carve out funds to have the same company that's doing all the instrumentation up on the high and low bridge over in West Seattle come out, and their specialty, their company is called Bridge Diagnostics, Inc. And they developed this company around putting strain gauges and other types of instrumentation around a movable structure, and then running the structure through its cycle for opening and closing, gathering that data, and then telling us, okay, do we have a friction problem in one bearing versus the other? Do we need to rebalance the bridge? Because that does change over time for all sorts of reasons. It's not just related to painting or if you change the deck material. And so we're going to do those analyses for all 3 ship canal bridges, including Ballard, this year. And then if you've been paying attention to council and in particular the Transportation and Utilities Subcommittee, you know that we were audited last year, somewhat as a result of what happened with high-rise bridge, although that's not really a maintenance issue. It was more of a design and code at the time it was designed issue. And so they came in and looked at 20 years worth of maintenance funding versus maintenance actual expenditures, and spent a couple of 100 hours talking to me and folks on my team about how we do our business. And what came out of it were several recommendations for ways that we can make our approach at what's really historically, because of our funding and staffing levels, more asset reactive maintenance to true asset preservation, right? Where every year or every 2 years, whatever the cycle is for a bridge, you're really looking at your data, seeing how the condition of it changes, not for the overall bridge with one number, but by each type of element on the entire bridge. And then using that in a life cycle cost analysis to figure out what is the exact right time or range of time to do major maintenance work or more work beyond routine maintenance, so that you can extend the life of the structure. It's another form. Life cycle cost analysis is a cost benefit analysis. How do you get the best bang for your buck? And that's intrinsically tied to the rate at which components in the bridge deteriorate, whether they're actual fixed structure or movable bridge components. And that's really exciting. You know, a lot of people shudder at the thought of an audit, you know, I guess because of the Internal Revenue Service, it has a kind of a negative stigma surrounding any type of audit, but we welcome that conversation. It codifies a story that we've been trying to tell certainly since 2018, since I got here, and long before I got here with my predecessors and folks like John Buswell and Richard Miller, if anybody remembers them. And so it's also combines some recommendations. We invited WashDOT and FHWA to give us an informal audit of our bridge inspection program in 2019. And the city auditor's audit codifies or captures some of that feedback that we got informally as well. So it's a really exciting time for roadway structures, but boy, do we have our work cut out for us. And with that, I'll take a knee and pause for any questions for myself or for Diane.
So Matt, does that all boil down in some regards to fair means you're about to find out with a lot of more detailed, more microscopic kind of analysis of the bridge over there?
So sorry, you were breaking up a little bit there. Are you asking, you know, as we do the response to the audit and make our life cycle cost analyses more robust?
Yeah, well, I see that see if I can put this into the screen. I see that the BRT calls the Ballard Bridge in fair condition, which sort of, when you, I guess, look at what Diane said about 500, or let's call it $500 million to $1 billion bridge need there.
Yeah.
And you put it in line behind the much more significantly problematic West Seattle Bridge and the Magnolia Bridge. Does that basically, and you know, I guess what I'm trying to say is, you know, if it's in fair condition, it means we got a while to go. We don't really know until we do this next really detailed engineering study on all the componentry and more of a structural technical study.
No, because the life cycle cost analysis hangs heavily on your element level condition data, but we do have the data, right? So when we have end up with a rating for a bridge of, you know, good, fair, poor, we can accurately say that about the bridge itself. And if you look into the report, so our every state uses a reporting system, right? So you go out, do your inspection, collect your notes, take your pictures, come back to the desk, and then enter all that data into a reporting system. And a local agency in every state in the country does that, and they use the same system as the state that they report up to as a local agency. So here, WashDOT created the first automated or computer-based bridge inspection software before anybody else in the country many, many years ago. It's called BridgeWorks. And that's still the system of record today for every bridge in the state, whether it's for a local agency or for WashDOT. And so we have the data, and when we write the way the reports work is you enter in all the element level condition data by quantity. So how much for that, like a bridge, the columns on a bridge, how many are in good, fair, or poor condition state 1, 2, 3, and 4. Mm-hmm. And each condition state has to add up to the entirety for that type of element. And that calculates in the system how the bridge gets rated out overall. So we know the bridges are safe for operation and fair. You know, the condition currently for the Ballard Bridge, that would only change as it deteriorates over time if something needs maintenance and we don't have the funds to get to it. Doing the life cycle cost analysis with that data is not going to change the condition of the bridge.
So that happens in a couple of years then.
When would it shift from?
I'm just saying the study sort of scope happen over the next couple of years. Is that what I saw till 23?
Oh yeah, yep, yeah. Where our commitment in our response letter, which is an appendix in the Office of City Auditor report, I've committed to adopting all 10 of the recommendations by 2023, end of the year.
Well,
if anybody would,
with you, but I should probably keep moving the meeting along too. I'm hogging time. Sorry, Matt.
No worries.
But I'm sure we're going to get back to some questions about that and in the context of the BIRT. We're also really delighted this evening to be joined by a few different stakeholder folks, as I mentioned. I'm just going to mention all three of them, and then they can go and make a few comments in this order. Mike Stewart is the Executive Director of the Ballard Alliance, business organization collective here in Ballard. We're also joined by Ben Brosomley from the Northwest Seattle Coalition, interested in mass transit development and futures, and Ray Dubicki with the nascent Share the Cities organization, and also a local journalist for varying blogs and places. So we'll go Mike, then Ben, then Ray, and then we'll have a panel discussion.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks, Brent, for the introduction. Mike Stewart, I'm Executive Director of the Ballard Alliance. We were formerly the Ballard Chamber of Commerce. We're now an improvement district in Ballard. So we are funded in part through assessments on commercial and also residential property owners within the core of Ballard. So in total, we represent hundreds of businesses and thousands of residents within the Ballard core. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And as Lita mentioned, I was very privileged to have the opportunity to participate on the stakeholder advisory group. And Lita and I have been in many meetings. In fact, I think she already knows what I'm going to say, which is no shock to anybody. But look, I think one thing that's really important that we often forget, right, is to look a little bit back at history. And so I'm just going to read you a very short blurb that's part of the Seattle Comp Plan regarding hub urban villages. As everyone on this call probably knows, Ballard is a hub urban village. And kind of an opening principle in that document says Seattle's strategy for accommodating future growth and creating a sustainable city builds on the foundation of these neighborhoods and brings together a number of tools. They list 4, I'll only list 2. The first tool is pedestrian and transit-oriented communities. And the second is the provision of services and infrastructure targeted to support that growth. And so when you look at this document, that I believe it was originally 2005 and updated in 2013, and you think about Ballard, unquestionably, the growth is here, right? We've seen it. We've seen the apartment buildings and the condominium buildings take root in Ballard, and we're working to, sort of adapt along with that. And in fact, we've got at least one active project on Market Street with 2 others within a block of each other that are coming online. So we've hit that goal. I won't quote the numbers of where we are projected above the growth projections. But that side of the coin has happened. But what I would argue today is the other side of the coin, the transit-oriented community and the provision of services and infrastructure aren't there. But the cool thing is sound transit is a great hope for us, right? To be able to make real on that. And I know it's still 16 plus years away. But I think it's important to look back at that and to look at where the real density of growth is. And if I were to drop a pin on a map, I would probably say 22nd Avenue Northwest and Northwest Market Street. We could probably debate it a little bit, but I think that is where the growth is, and we're seeing much more growth there. So, our position on sound transit has always been and will always continue to be a tunneled option to Ballard that is located at or west of 15th Avenue Northwest. And we need to deliver on that promise. We need to provide that transportation access to all of those individuals that are already in our hub urban village. I think that's a very important point. We did a district tour yesterday with some leaders in our organization and did a walk around Ballard looking at all kinds of different things, but transportation was certainly one of them. And we took a very strong note of the distance it takes to go from 22nd to 15th Avenue Northwest, noted the amount of time it takes to cross the 15th Avenue Northwest intersection, and then the length of time to get over to 14th. And I know the differential between 15th and 14th is 1 block, but it's a large block, especially if you consider the time it takes pedestrians to cross over. So that's, to us, that's very significant, and it's very meaningful to have a tunneled location on 15th Avenue Northwest. I would also say I'm engaged also with the discussions on the maritime and industrial planning strategy that the mayor has set forward. And, if you locate a light rail station on 14th Avenue Northwest, what I fear is that the need and desire to create transit-oriented development in that corridor, in those industrial lands, would just be far too great. And remember, these are decisions that ultimately will be made 20 years from now by folks that aren't us, that aren't working on these issues. And, you know, it's been almost 20 years since the comp plan, and I'm looking back at it now. Who's going to be looking back in 20 years? I think there's great value in preserving those industrial lands, and I just feel like the pressure would be too great to make changes there, and would just argue that we need to serve the existing density that's there right now and is growing this year, next year, and the next 5 years after that. I know I'm almost over time, but I think, look, as we talk about realignment, what I want us to do, what I would urge Sound Transit to do, is take the time that is necessary. We talked a lot in the SAG process, the stakeholder advisory group process, about land acquisition costs. And when we looked at the initial numbers from Sound Transit, we said, boy, those values are predicated on 2014, 2015 numbers. It's a vastly different environment. And as you all got deep into it, we've found out that that's true, right? So, and then we're seeing the cost delta between a bridge and a tunnel actually coming a lot closer together. So when we are faced with a pandemic that we're hopefully on the way out of, we don't know what the economy is going to do. Fortunately, your revenues are increasing this year. We're hopeful that we're going to enter a bit of a boom. We also have a new administration in the White House, and hopefully some more potential for funding these kinds of programs. I just feel like there's so many moving parts, and we've got a 100-year project here that we're looking at, and we need to be delivering on these promises of providing services, infrastructure, and transit-oriented communities, that I just strongly urge Sound Transit to take a pause and make sure that we're making the right decisions, that we've got the right numbers, and that we're really not rushing to make some realignment plan at the end of a pandemic just because we're concerned about keeping up with our project schedule. I think we understand it. We understand the pause that the whole world has been in here for a little bit. So I just hope that we can take the time to seed it and come out of this thing with an amazing project that will serve this community for 100 years or more. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Mike. Super helpful and thoughtful. I think there's been so much pressure on attention to the fact that it takes so long to develop, design, permit, and execute these projects, that it becomes the big focus. But you think about what we would be doing now if there were 2 or 3 bridges over the Hudson River instead of whatever it took to put a tunnel there. It feels like you're really right to be focusing on the fact that whatever time it takes, we need to get a project that's really going to serve the really urban area of Northwest Seattle for many, many decades. Ben, would you like to speak for a minute?
Yeah, thank you. Mike always takes the wind out of my sails. We generally echo each other pretty directly, but the Northwest Seattle Coalition is a broad array of neighborhood, business, and industrial organizations that represent generally Seattle's District 6 and 7. Membership includes a bunch of organizations, about 15, 16 now, that have in the past signed letters to the city of Seattle and to Sound Transit to advocate for improved outcomes all up and down the Elliott Avenue West and 15th Avenue West corridors, and also advocate for the future users of light rail and everyone using this corridor today. And fundamentally, it can be really boiled down into our hashtag is a tunnel to Ballard. That is the best outcome for everybody. We're seeing that, I think there's a little bit of a cost delta to get from 14th to 15th, but the cost delta between 14th Avenue, a high bridge to 14th Avenue and a tunnel to 14th Avenue, I think is within the margin of error at the moment. That could have changed again, but that's as we warned a long time ago, land acquisition costs are going to be a huge factor going forward. And really what that means is the state requires Sound Transit to do a long range planning process and then vote on things and then only build what our voters have voted on. So we really have to get ahead of the long range planning process before we decide exactly what we're going to do in ST3. And that's unfortunately not how state RCW works. And Sound Transit likes to point that out to us every time we complain about it, and it's fair. But we have to change that. We have to say, okay, we need a long range plan that looks at 50 years, that looks at 100 years, that looks beyond. The only addition to Sound Transit's long range plan, or excuse me, in addition to Sound Transit 3, the only expansion in the long range plan currently is from Ballard to UW. There's no thought process about Aurora. There's no thought process about Crown Hill. We've done those studies, but they're just not in the long range plan. And so it's really hard for Sound Transit's planning process currently to consider the future. And I think they're still trying to do it despite that, but it's hard to do it well. It's hard to do it completely when the process is kind of upside down. We lock in a final EIS in 2024 and then start after 2024 is when the long range planning process is scheduled. So fundamentally, the Northwest Seattle Coalition is going to be always an organization that's trying to do this right the first time. And that it was a tunnel to Ballard. We're seeing that kind of play out as an equal, if not far better opportunity. But it goes beyond that as well as we go through this process, as we come to the draft EIS input process, as we work on the final EIS. That's what we're all of these organizations in this region of Seattle, that's what we're going to be focused on. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Ben. Last of our brief panelists tonight is Ray Dubicki, and then we'll have a broader discussion. Ray, please take the stand.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if this actually works. Can you all see my slide? Interbay Unbound. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Ray Dubicki, he, him pronouns. I'm a renter in Ballard, and I've been working with Share the Cities on issues around Interbay and Ballard industrial lands. I also write for The Urbanist, but tonight I'm not wearing the press hat. Over the last few months, organizations have signed on with Share the Cities to ask that BERT be reconsidered. Why would groups like the 36 Dems, Seattle Neighborhood Greenways, 350 Seattle, and the Transit Riders Union all look at this report and not see issues so involved that they're asking it to be shelved? Well, we're going to look at that. First, we want to recognize the hard work that city staff put together a study in the middle of a pandemic. Short time frame, they got some really important data and some really important outreach done. Thank you, Diane and Matt. Unfortunately, the end reports didn't work as well. The final BERT report and the Ballard Bridge reports shoved all the good stuff into appendices and came up with a $2 billion highway wish list. Bikes and buses show up, but really only as garnish. The study and the report don't connect. And to understand that disconnect, we have to understand one really important fact. And it's a fact that everybody seems to know, but keeps dropping. 15th Avenue is a dangerous highway. Since 2005, there have been as many accidents on the stretch of 15th Avenue as there were on the same stretch of Aurora and on the same stretch of Interstate 5. I was in Ballard Pediatrics when that building was actually struck by a truck coming off of 15th. This is not an accident. This is the design of the road. It is built for speed, as anyone who has ever tried to drive the new 35 posted speed limit on Interbay can attest. That design comes from way back. In the 1950s highway plan for Seattle, which is on the left, there was an outline of making 15th through Ballard a highway. Parts of that were scrapped. The Thompson Expressway on the east side was shelved in the freeway revolt, but parts of it were carried through. And the 2016 Seattle Freight Plan is on the right. It is the same plan. Plans like this are cornerstones of the BERT study. Highways like 15th have been baked into all the plans that the city has developed since the 1950s. Here's the list of plans included in the BERT report. Like the freight plan, each one recognizes that 15th is a dangerous road, a barrier to the neighborhood, and works to route around it in some way. Even as Ballard and Interbay are not the same communities that they were when the 50s highway plan was developed, that highway plan still shows up in all of our current planning. But instead of considering how to move away from oversized, dangerous roads, the BERT report borrows those old numbers. We've seen a drop in the number of cars using the Ballard Bridge, even as Ballard has grown. The report recommends building a bridge that can handle 20% more cars than the bridge has ever seen. Ignoring sound transit to come, ignoring bus improvements, ignoring work from home, a 20% larger bridge based on these numbers. And this has real impact on the ground. To handle 20% more cars, the proposed bridge designs have a massive intersection at Emerson and Nickerson. And then in the north end in Ballard, the alternatives range from keeping the current tangle of ramps to demolishing Pono Ranch with a flyover to dropping the landing of the bridge on Market Street. And let's talk about that Emerson-Nickerson interchange. It's a suburban cloverleaf shoehorned into the tight confines between the railroad and the ship canal. This wouldn't be necessary if BERT didn't have to overbuild and accommodate these wrong numbers. Don't forget, there's a bus stop somewhere in this tangle, and kids are supposed to get on the bus there and go up to Ballard High. The death spiral emphasizes how pedestrians and bikes are way down the priorities list here. Coming up 15th Avenue, pedestrians are supposed to go around the entire interchange to get to a sidewalk that's only on one side of the bridge. And that's the problem with the overall BERT report. It's one-sided, tilted towards $2 billion in highway expansion. BERT proposes orange clouds of pedestrian improvements, but they are drawn across a map that doesn't show how dangerous the highway is, or its noise, or its pollution, or how it's a barrier to everybody who walks or rolls, and how it divides our neighborhood. By rehashing these old plans, the Ballard Bridge study and the BERT study reports became their own barrier to a future of anything but traffic. So for all of these reasons, Share the Cities and our organizing partners are making a fairly easy request. Let's get the right numbers, not the ones that are steeped in years of highway building, but something that recognizes the neighborhood we live in today. We have a chance, given the city is updating its comp plan over the next 3 years. Let's do the new comp plan, revisit BERT and the Ballard Bridge, measure accurately before spending $2 billion on roads we don't need. Take a pause and make the right decisions. Thank you. Thank you to Ballard District Council for having me today and talking with us. I'll share our information if you want to get in touch. But we look forward to more questions.
Great, thanks very much. Unshare your screen, or you can do that.
I got it.
Yeah, great. So as is usually the case, we all have so much information to share, we don't end up with as much time for discussion as we want. So we'll try and facilitate this as expediently as possible. I guess the way we've been doing this, the way we'll do it tonight again, is mostly to let Angie Gerald, the Vice President of Ballard District Council, basically expedite questions from audience and members. But I feel like before we do that, I should at least let that same conversation just evolve a little bit, because that was a pretty serious castigation against the BERT study, which was very thoughtfully done, Ray, and I appreciate it. And I'd be interested, I think we all would, to hear a little bit from whoever and whichever of you at SDOT, kind of what the thoughts are in response to that. Still on mute, Diane, if you're the one talking.
That would be me. So we were given a very explicit job by the Washington State Legislature, right? And we used a lot of modeling analysis looking towards the future with the assumption that there would be a lot more growth, right, by 2040 or 42, and making the assumption that many, many more people would be traveling on transit, specifically Sound transit, and that when we have a new bridge, there would be capacity, adequate and safe capacity for pedestrians and bicyclists, and there would be better connected bikeways and trails, and we would have a Burke-Gilman connection. And so we were actually basing our assumptions on not the status quo. However, we were also basing our assumptions on the tremendous growth that is happening in all of our neighborhoods, right? And the tremendous employment growth that is happening, and how to accommodate that. And the situation is also that this is the BINMIC, and this is a freight corridor. And it's hard to get around the demands of the delivery of goods and manufacturing and the employment. And, I feel like during the Freight Master Plan, one of our planners talked about how, okay, well, so, we all like a beer and well, not all, but many people like a beer and a burger. And like if you sit down, how did that meat get there? How was the beer distributed there? How do we get all of the things that we need and we expect in terms of our market and consumption of goods, which is a reality? And how do those, flounder or halibut get from Alaska to the port to where they're going? And so because it's such a constrained corridor, honestly, and the alternatives, yes, there is the I-5, there's the SR-99, right? And yet, because of the number of manufacturing and industrial jobs that the city looks to hold on to, because they tend to be living wage jobs, we did assume there would be, we had to make a certain number of assumptions that included people traveling. And our assumptions were that single occupancy vehicle traffic would be diminished relative to population, but that population would grow considerably. And if you think about just the Armory development, and we don't know which way that development is going to go in terms of whether it's just like a manufacturing and industrial area, or whether, per the Department of Commerce's study, there could be 1,600 units of housing, right, in their proposal. Of course, it's ultimately the city's decision how that property is zoned, and there's a lot of other questions. But nevertheless, we had to assume there was the possibility. So when we did our work, we looked at like the outside ranges of possibility. So that's just some of the elements that went into our thinking, I would have to say.
Well, there's no doubt there's a hell of a lot of people already, and there are going to be a lot more. You can look down at Market Street right now and see that there's more than 2,000 units of development just in the permit process right now, just on Market Street. So it's abundant, and certainly for those of us who have lived long enough in the Ballard area, we understand that even if we're all riding buses, there's still just a lot of traffic that needs to go over the bridge and around. But I think the point really, Ray, that there's a real safety concern too.
One of the interesting things, well, first of all, again, Diane and Matt did a top-notch job given the constraints that they were facing for these two enormous studies in a pandemic. Outreach was phenomenal. A whole lot of research went into these papers. Unfortunately, when we're talking about traffic, we're talking about induced demand. When you build another lane, there are going to be cars to fill it. And those cars are going to put pressure on the industrial sites in Interbay. We already see it. Whole Foods is zoned industrial. We get there by car. It's not just that the industrial places need the deliveries, it's that we are getting to all of these commercial sites, a Michael's, a storage place, by car. that are there because we've overbuilt the roads already, and we're setting ourselves up to do it again. I would also point out, this is an enormous freight corridor for trains. We have one of the biggest rail yards on the West Coast, but unfortunately, because of the limitations put on the BERT study, trains were not part of the consideration of getting goods and services to the industrial sites. Less traffic on these roads means preserving the industrial spaces and their really unique spots that they have in access to water and access to the saltwater port, and being able to keep our legacy industrial sites where we love them right here in Ballard.
Somebody want to give me a 30 to 90-second response if they want to, and then I'm going to try and pitch to Angie to ask a community question or two.
Yeah, working with BNSF would be a different project, and increasing their capacity would be, a completely, it's something that we don't have jurisdiction over, right? The railroads are almost like a sovereign nation in a way, that the way their property is owned and the way they choose to move goods. And it would be a very different study that would have to be mandated by someone, right? To try and expand the capacity of those rail cars and that rail yard. And that is way, a whole nother subject that I'm not expert on.
Unfortunately, it's one of those things that in the layers of issues in Interbay, we are looking at silos, and the silos keep us from getting real progress being made in so many ways. We can take a little bit more time, get it done right, get some of those silos broken down.
Like I said, I do want to pass this on, although I think we could keep going for another hour just in this conversation, and we'll hopefully be able to have before long another follow-up conversation that maybe focuses just more on Ballard Bridge and 15th Corridor. But Angie, why don't you promote a further discussion?
Great, thank you. I'm going to try and amalgamate some things because we've already touched on some topics of questions that came in. But I think I'll try and start with one that builds on this dialogue that's already going on. And just trying to think of how to position this exactly, but it would be interesting to hear a little bit more, and I'll pitch it to Ray first. Last month, we did have the maritime industrial community had a nice in-depth discussion with a lot of perspectives from them. They really emphasized how important, timeliness and stability of the transportation corridor is. So it's very understandable, the organizations that you're talking about and looking to the future with climate justice and social justice and wanting to move away from single car vehicles. But it's hard to understand some of the criticisms that you very stridently have toward the BERT study in relation to seeing 15th and the corridor, the highway through the neighborhood in all a negative light, when in so many ways, Diane was touching on this, it really serves jobs, moves goods within the community, helps us connect. And so as we're looking at electrification of vehicles, as we're looking at trying to serve, a really multifaceted local, very local neighborhood economy, I guess I just was curious to have you speak just a little bit more to why are you not also looking at the positive sides of having this corridor and how we can, also work with pedestrians, bikes, safety, while moving things, using all these new forms of transportation and new ways of handling things. It felt like just the negative side of it.
That's an excellent question, because we do focus on a lot of the negative sides of internal combustion engines. They're noisy, they're polluting, and we have far too many of them rolling up and down 15th Avenue. The question is, does 15th Avenue north of the Ship Canal actually need to remain an open connection to get to Interstate 5 in the capacity that it already is? Some would argue that it needs to be this jug handle, that you have to have an immediate access north and south, but we do have a whole lot of connection to Interstate 5 going southward. The other thing is that if you look at the larger scope, and this is one of those maps that we share with federal stakeholders, Interbay is a cul-de-sac of industrial areas in King County. You can follow a line of industrial space from Interbay going across downtown by train to the Duwamish, through Renton, all the way down to the south part of the county. They are connected by train. They are connected by large roads. Do those roads necessarily need to go across the Ballard Bridge and through Ballard in order to convey all of these goods to the highway? And the argument is, we don't have good numbers in order to make that decision. We have decades of assumptions, but not really any good numbers to support that. And that's really what the pause is asking for, to come in, get us good numbers, and get us a good look at what people are actually doing.
Interesting. Yeah, it like with the electrification of trucks and different things. Anyway, I can think of many more questions and ways to keep building on that. So it would be great to continue the dialogue. Let me jump into, and were you trying to respond, Diane?
I was going to say one thing, but there is also a couple questions that have been sort of lingering here that I wanted to make sure we got to.
I was going to bring the ones out of the Q&A on Zoom. Do you want me to touch on those real quick?
Yes.
Or do you have other? Okay. So there was a question which Diane had partially answered about whether the Ballard Bridge would be possible for federal grant funding. So it'd be interesting to hear a little bit more about that.
So I had responded, so I'll say my response, and then this is really goes.
So for others who are listening in on YouTube or hearing this later, they can't see the written response. So I just wanted to give you a chance to flesh that out just a little bit.
So I'll respond, and then Matt can correct me. So I said that that the Ballard Bridge would likely be a good candidate for federal grant funding, but that just because it's an alternative to I-5 doesn't mean that it's the fiscal responsibility of the federal government. It's under the city of Seattle's jurisdiction to do that work. Okay, Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, my experience with grant applications in the few years I've been with the city is to provide all the technical data that they need to prioritize where grant applications and there's a lot of need. I think I can't remember the news report over the last couple of days, but I think they came out with another America's Report Card on infrastructure. It was the governor of Utah on PBS NewsHour last night, and they were raving in Utah because they got the highest score at a C-. And so, grant applications for any piece of infrastructure, whether it's a bridge or otherwise, are super, super competitive. And without going through some pretty careful system-wide analysis, I can't really tell you how the Ballard Bridge ranks up against anything else in the city of Seattle at this point.
So let me jump on to the next question here. Are there any short-term improvements for pedestrians across the Ballard Bridge and on 15th? Is anyone able to field that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. I had a slide on it in the bridge rehab and replacement sub-program. About $5 million out of that 15 million total was for bike safety on bridges. And they looked at several options for Ballard Bridge. Several of them were not executed because they were too costly. And the safety improvements that they did put in are on the north end of the bridge on both the east and west side. And it's improved safety in terms of curb bulbs, ADA curb ramps, and signs and markings.
So are those recommendations that are out there now, or is that actual capital plans to make some of that happen?
No, the two that I just talked about on the north end of the bridge were installed in
those are the things
2019 and 2020.
Those are good improvements.
So one other question that came in, this was not so much regarding regional transportation, but we'll let this slide in also. Kirk is wondering, has SDOT decided how to evaluate the impact of residential street closures on post-pandemic traffic volumes? or has SDOT already decided that all temporary closures will be permanent? And I think this is maybe partially regarding the neighborhood greenways and different kind of safe street closures that have come up
Safe
during
and
the
healthy
pandemic.
streets as well as.
I think it's the Stay Healthy Streets.
Stay healthy streets, excuse me.
So the city is involved in analysis right now to make 20 miles of the Stay Healthy Streets permanent. So depending on where you are, what your street is, they may or may not. And our project development department is actively involved in that work. And I'd like to say one last thing in response to Ray, and this is that, you know, if we are really thinking comprehensively, if we are really thinking in an interdisciplinary way, if we really were thinking in a much bigger picture, a lot of the problem is our jobs housing balance, right? And the unaffordability of housing here. And if you look at most of the jobs in the BINMIC and where people actually live who work there, it's almost like looking at a map and tossing up confetti, and it lands everywhere from Pierce County to Snohomish, right? And that the regional transportation system is all right and really good in some places and not in others. And the unaffordability of housing in Seattle is a problem that's a market problem. It's incredibly comprehensive and large, and again, like outside of my area of expertise in a way. But if we really were going to look at comprehensive transportation planning from an interdisciplinary perspective, we would be looking from a jobs, housing, transportation kind of a picture.
Well, there's certainly no question that the maritime industrial strategy that the mayor's working on is not looking at trying to increase housing to any significant degree near those jobs. So I think you're not going to see that part change, unfortunately, and not really at the desire of some of those folks. I want to key on one of the things you said, Diane, which is just sort of the big picture. And as I thought about the big picture, I immediately thought really more of Lita's project. And the fact that whether we're working from home like this on these Zoom calls all the time still in 15 years or not so much or not at all, we're all hoping to be riding the train for those of us who go downtown. There were a number of really, I thought, poignant comments from Mike Stewart and Ben Brosemley about kind of what really I think is we all hope around my neighborhood, the preferred alternative, which isn't necessarily the one we're seeing as getting the big green light so far. So I just wanted to ask you to follow up a little bit on those comments and kind of, you know, how is Mike went like this with the Delta, but I think the Delta is more like the surface option coming up to meet the tunnel option. But in any case, they're getting closer. So how does it play out from here? Who's going to make that decision and when, I guess, once we get to
Sure. It. So thank you, Mike and Ben. I know you both spoke to the Sound Transit project and the Ballard Link extension, and Brent to the Delta and sort of what does the future look like and how are decisions made. So we do have a number of different route and station options that are extending out to Ballard, of course, and there are tunnel as well as elevated options. And these are the ones that are on the table now, right, that the board directed us to study in the drafted environmental impact statement. It is a draft, and the purpose of it really is to understand all the myriad of potential impacts and also benefits for the public that then weigh in and say, here is what we'd like to see, comment on that analysis and inform our board in confirming or modifying that preferred alternative. We also we had preliminary costs that were out, as folks have been mentioning, the deltas between essentially the 14th high level bridge and that 14th tunnel that really has shrunk there. And there's a little bit more when you look at 15th. We're gonna have updated costs later in the year when we publish the draft EIS that will be out there to inform folks, along with information about land use and other sorts of neighborhood effects and various pieces of transportation and connections. Another piece I just wanted to pick up on too is we have, as an ongoing theme, heard about these connections to the really dense Ballard Urban Village area. And so how are we thinking about those connections? And that is a big part of our station planning effort. So in parallel to us preparing this environmental document, we'll also have an understanding of both what community feedback we've had around the stations and access, but also reflections of some agency work to share out with the public, again, as sort of a draft form for folks to look at that and help them understand the differences between the alternatives at 14th and 15th and elevated and not. All of that, the decisions are made by the Sound Transit Board. We have an 18-member board. The mayor of the city of Seattle is on that board, as well as Council Member Deborah Juarez from District 5. We also have Executive Dow Constantine on that board, just representing King County. Council Member Joe McDermott is on that board, and so forth. So I'm happy to share more about that. But Brent, is that helpful in terms of?
Yeah, I think it's quite helpful. I mean,
Yeah.
certainly it's going to play out, and I'm sure people who are participating in this and hearing this have widely varying levels of understanding of the Environmental Policy Act and how it works. But certainly after we get through pretty detailed EAS process, then hopefully the voice of the community out here will start to really resonate, because it's us in West Seattle who are really going to suffer and delight in what we get.
Brent, can I just mention one thing?
Yep.
As that draft EIS comes out and Sound Transit seeks input from the community, the Northwest Seattle Coalition is also going to be focused on station access. And in Ballard, that really looks like a good connection to the west side of 15th directly to wherever the station is. In Interbay, for example, that looks like figuring out how we actually have a pedestrian environment on Dravis Street, across the Dravis Street Bridge is one of the worst bridges in the city, despite the fact that we're not really doing much about that. And it doesn't really have a pedestrian connection for the most part to Magnolia, and not a great one to Queen Anne either. So, as a coalition of both of these city council districts, that's going to be one of the main focuses as the draft EIS input process begins.
Thank you, Ben, and we appreciate that. I mean, that access, we would like people to be able to access the light rail and be using it through this corridor. And so that kind of feedback is going to be very useful to inform our station planning process, as well as, of course, the project we eventually build.
So Brent, we're running just a little bit long. There's 2 more community questions I would love to get to. Is everyone okay sticking around just a little bit more?
Yeah, let's try and hit it and quit it in like 5 to 10 minutes max. I want to respect people's time, both participating on the panel and otherwise. But sure, we can run a little late since we're all just at home in a meeting anyway.
Great. Well, so we had several questions come in related to Metro Transit service, and we don't have anyone specifically here from Metro tonight. But I kind of wanted to back up just for a second to a more higher level umbrella historical view, and personally just say, when my family moved to the neighborhood, to our current house was in 2001, and my oldest son was about 1 year old, and the city was actively setting aside land for the monorail. It's just during that very narrow window of time where it looked like that might actually be happening. And we were visualizing when he was in high school, we'd be riding the monorail to football games at Memorial Stadium, accessing jobs and entertainment downtown, blah, blah, blah. So he's in college now. And meanwhile, I have emails coming in asking people, when are we going to get bus service restored on 32nd Avenue Northwest? Or why is there no bus to Golden Gardens and Seaview Avenue? So we have this funny disconnect of all these years going by, all of this growth happening in Ballard, so many thousands of new people, many new buildings, many more new buildings, very imminent, and a real disconnect between a total lack of any service in fairly large swaths of the neighborhood in Sunset Hill and down below. Where is the concurrent growth? Who oversees that, or what's kind of just the real layman's explanation to Ballardites, whether you've lived here just for a few years or for a long time? Why do we see a light rail almost ready to open in the U district, and why will my son be pushing 40 by the time it finally gets here? Like what's kind of the quick way to explain how we got where we are, that we're still saying let's take more time and study it more? And does anyone want to try and I just feel like it comes up a lot in just kind of everyday neighborhood conversations like, what is up with that? So I don't know if anyone wants to try and feel that. And I know some of it is just geographic, that we're a difficult neighborhood to build for. But Lita, do you want to try and jump into that at all, or Diane?
Sure. Well, so, I think our light rail and mass transit expansion story, as a region, of course, we could have done this 50 or 60 or so years ago, but we have consecutively sort of started with our Central Link line, and then as we're able to put together a package and go out to voters and get approval for that, we're expanding. We are regional in that we're trying to extend all the way to Everett and serve folks in Snohomish County and in Pierce County as well. And so as part of that process that I was not involved in, but to develop the Sound Transit 3 package, a lot of engagement and outreach, as well as building off of past planning studies to determine where those corridors could be. And then of course, you have that, and then you have the timelines that we have in front of us, just how long it takes to plan, design, and build. In particular, with this project, we have a new downtown tunnel we'll be building through downtown, as well as other complex structures like crossing 2 bodies of water. And actually the timelines that we have were accelerated. We had sort of put out an initial proposal of a timeline, and they said, no, that's what we need. So we need transit more quickly. And so have been working really hard, and appreciate the partnership too with the city of Seattle on and our agency partners in general to do a lot earlier coordination and think about how to do things like streamline permitting, have these conversations about earlier, try to narrow the range of options earlier. So all of that alternatives development work that was so much more robust than what we have, we had layers and layers of process. In part, it was to try to get to some consensus of where we're going sooner, because the more options that we study, the longer that it takes to sort of decide on the project to build and get to that design and engineering that needs to happen. So that was a little bit long-winded, but I know that that's what we're guided by now.
Does anyone else have a quick comment on that? And I just want to squish in one more question after that.
If they're truly interested in bus service, your King County council person is a great person to talk to. They have a direct line to Metro transit planners.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Jeannie Cole-Wells has been great and come to some of our meetings before. It's definitely still a real challenge getting bus service to some of the less densely populated parts of the neighborhood. So quite a few people literally have zero service.
Well, if there's anything comes out of this, it's a recognition. I think that we've got at least 14 or 15 years of really needing to use our buses. That's what we're going to have. So,
one more question.
Shot, and let's move on.
Yeah, sorry, Brent. One more question I would love to squish in. Someone from the neighborhood who is an example of someone who's wondering about bus service, who lives just, a bit outside of downtown Ballard, and their wife has MS, and she uses a motorized wheelchair, and they use their van, and they do park in downtown Ballard a lot. And he's concerned that with the upcoming Market Street repaving, which is between 15th and 24th Northwest, that's going to be a really major disruption for parking. We have many more, 7-story or taller buildings, multiple major construction projects that will also be happening, and then potentially, bridge construction, Sound Transit, and things farther in the future. But his concern is that it's very hard for people who do need special access. He's worried that all the curbside parking that they rely on is going to disappear. And he was wondering, is there any kind of ombudsman or advocate as our neighborhood is making our way through all of these different challenges and eras and figuring things out? How do seniors, how do people with special needs, how do we keep everyone getting where they need to go and accessing the local businesses? They like to shop at the local bookstore and the local fabric store and go to the health club. And how do we keep people successfully moving through the neighborhood while all this is going on? And is there is there anyone that we can recommend to them to help answer some of those questions as different projects are unfolding? I'm not sure if, within SDOT, is there any kind of community advocate as people have questions, or is it specific to different projects, or do people just contact their district council member? But if anyone has tips for questions like that, or Mike Stewart, I'm not sure with Ballard Alliance, if you guys end up doing any advocacy like that.
So I'm gonna try at this, and I will get back to you with the
Okay.
response, because this is important, right? That it is our job as the city to accommodate people with disabilities and to provide equal opportunities for those folks, whether they're in a mobility device or walking. And we have an ADA coordinator who just left for a different position, but there is definitely an office for people with disabilities to contact, and I will get back to you on this.
Okay, thank you.
Because when there's this kind of permit, so in order for all of this construction to happen and all of these changes to be happening, we also have a permitting office
Mhm.
who should be cognizant. I mean, this issue should be elevated. So yes, we'll stay in touch about this.
Thank you.
If I can also say, Disability Rights Washington, disabilityrightswa.org does significant amounts of advocacy in this area.
Okay.
And they also have a whole lot of tools available on their website. So
Okay.
track them down, they do very well.
Super. Two fantastic responses there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, we have more questions, but Brent, handing
But
back
we
to you.
don't
I
have
know
more
you're good.
time.
Yeah.
We could certainly have an all-day workshop on just the Ballard Bridge or just the Sound Transit connection.
Mhm.
Probably just have a workshop just on biking across the Ballard Bridge, for that matter. So so we won't try and tackle it right now. Matt's nodding though. I really want to say thank you to all of you for taking the time and energy to put together such thoughtful presentations and comments, and your participation civically with us tonight as well, just on the part of our great and rapidly and radically changing city, and rapidly and radically changing Ballard, part of the city as well. Thanks all of you. Thanks, Wes, for hanging in there, even though we didn't need your technical support. We appreciate your being here and coordinating our being here, all of us. Everybody, really appreciate it. I can't say that enough. Look forward to trying to fit in a follow-up discussion about some of these transportation issues in Ballard before very long. As I mentioned at the outset, we're juggling a lot of really pressing issues, and this is no less important than the others, but also not really more. So it's hard to find time once a month to do all this. But we'll keep trying, and we encourage you all to stay in touch with us. We're constantly updating our Facebook website and other stuff to post stuff. So, when we start trying to solicit comments for the EIS for Sound Transit 3, and when we're trying to, provide feedback and input to studies and projects they're looking for it at SDOT, consider us to be important stakeholders and a connection in the community, if you would. With that, I will just quit rambling lest I hop into too much of bureaucratic on and on. Really appreciate everyone's time. Really hope everyone has a nice sunny rest of the week. And we will see all of you Ballard District Council followers in 1 month on the second Wednesday of June. We're hoping to do a look back and at current and into the future of neighborhood planning and urban planning, especially right around the downtown Ballard core. It's been long enough now since the earlier Mike Stewart cited hub urban village developed concept in the early 90s, when we got growth management right up through the housing and affordability and livability agenda, the HALA that turned into the MHA, that turned into lots of different things that have happened over the last few years. Many in Ballard have only been here a few years. So we want to try and continue to educate people and give them the opportunity to kind of understand some of the trajectories of planning and policy that have led us to where we are now. So we're going to try and tackle that in June. Again, thank you all for this evening's conversation on transportation. Stay well, stay healthy. Hopefully everyone will be back to normal soon, and we will see